Britain counts down to Brexit, but can the Prime Minister negotiate a deal? And if not, could she be forced out of office? I'm Adnan Nawaz, and today's newsmaker is Theresa May. It's the group of 28 countries whose common interests have ensured Europe's longest period of peace. But by the end of March next year, the United Kingdom will no longer be a member of the European Union. With just 4 months to go before the divorce, the British Prime Minister, Theresa May, she still doesn't have a workable plan to negotiate a withdrawal that suits all sides. Her idea, called the Chequers Plan, isn't even acceptable to all members of her own cabinet. Last week, another minister quit. Jo Johnson resigned and called for the public to be allowed to vote again on one of the biggest issues to face the country since World War II. Natalie Pahonen reports.
The fanfare around Brexit is reaching a crescendo.
The negotiations for our departure are now in the endgame, and we are working extremely hard through the night to make progress on the remaining issues in the withdrawal agreement, which are significant.
The UK is due to leave the European Union single market and the customs union, but the finer details of the split are still being ironed out, with just months to spare. The deal needs to be approved by the Cabinet, then approved by the EU, then voted on and passed in the UK Parliament before it can be signed off. If there's a stumbling block at any of those stages, it could mean a so-called no-deal divorce. One of the key issues to resolve for the UK in the EU is the border between Northern Ireland and Ireland.
We need to have in this treaty what is called a backstop. That is, an all-weather assurance to be sure that there will not be a hard border on the island of Ireland.
The Prime Minister's cabinet is divided over the terms of a deal with the EU. Theresa May's ability to unite her ministers to back her position has become a political guessing game. Last week, Jo Johnson, the brother of former Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson, became the 6th minister to resign over Brexit.
We are barrelling towards an incoherent Brexit that is going to leave us trapped in a subordinate relationship to the EU.
He has called for the public to be given another vote. He's not alone. Almost 700,000 people marched in London for another referendum. Despite these calls, Theresa May is holding firm. There are demands from all sides of the political spectrum for the details of the deal to be published. But it seems there's also confusion at the highest levels of office, even at this stage, about how dependent the island nation is on the EU.
We want a bespoke arrangement on goods which recognises the peculiar, frankly, geographic economic entity that is the United Kingdom. We are, and I hadn't quite understood the full extent of this, but if you look at the UK and you look at how we trade in goods, we're particularly reliant on the Dover-Calais crossing.
Theresa May has said no deal is better than a bad deal. As the clock counts down on the UK's exit from the EU, no deal could become a reality. Natalie Pahonen, The Newsmakers.
And to discuss this, I'm joined from Strasbourg by Julie Girling. She's a member of the European Parliament for South West England and Gibraltar. Julie supports a second Brexit referendum. In Cambridge, we have Graham Gudgeon. He's a former special advisor to Northern Ireland's First Minister. And Mike Galsworthy joins us from London. Mike is the founder of Scientists for EU, a campaign to keep the UK in the European Union. Thank you for your time, all three of you, for joining us on the programme. Shall we start with the very essence of the debate? And let's take it as we are now, in the middle of November. Is Brexit good for Britain? Julie.
Well, it isn't good for Britain now, and it never was. I'm one of those people who I was never supporting Brexit right from the very beginning, but I guess when it first happened I thought, okay, maybe I'll just have to hold my nose, but very quickly I put that foolish thought aside and I've been campaigning against it ever since. So it certainly looks beginning to look worse and worse the closer we get.
Graham?
Well, I think the big reason for voting for Brexit is a matter of whether you want to be a future province of a United States of Europe or you want to be an independent, sovereign, democratic country. I very much want the latter, and therefore I support it. I rather agree with Julie in the short term. I think that there may be some disruption, and certainly the EU is trying to make it as hard as possible for the UK to actually leave. But I think we'll get over that period, and it'll be reasonably good for the UK economy in the long term. But I don't think the economics are the primary reason for voting Brexit.
And Mike, to you, the same question.
Yeah, I'm going to agree somewhat with both of the previous two, which is we are looking at a complete mess right now. I was for remaining. When the vote came in for leave, I thought, right, we have to make the most of this. I wrote plans for UK and EU science after Brexit. But I always maintain that the public have the right to say at the end of the day whether they like what's on offer. And it looks like none of the options now that are on offer are going to be acceptable to the public. So I'm all for that public vote, which has the right to ditch the whole thing entirely, because I think no Brexit options look good right now. On matters of economics, but also on matters of sovereignty and self-determination, it's all looking pretty disempowering.
OK, Graham, you mentioned sovereignty there, and for Leavers, the arguments whether the UK will indeed regain its sovereignty, that it would have greater control over immigration, and that it would be able to make trade deals that are more beneficial to the UK than those that are in place right now, with the country being part of the European Union. Are those still the same views of those who want to leave?
Yes, they are, and I think the trade deals are particularly important. And Theresa May's Chequers, as it's called, Chequers proposals to really keep the UK very close to or inside the EU's customs union will constrain the trade deals, and that's why Brexiteers tend not to like it.
But Liam Fox, the International Trade Secretary, has had absolutely no success so far. He said it would be one of the easiest things in the world to make new trade deals. Michael Gove, who is also a very, very influential leaver, he said the UK will hold all of the cards. Almost everything that these influential leavers said at the time of the referendum have not come true so far today, Graham.
No, I don't think that's correct. I mean, we haven't actually left yet, and we're not able to negotiate our own trade deals. But plenty of countries have indicated that they would like to have free trade agreements with us. Donald Trump, of course, has done that, but Japan, Australia, New Zealand, some of the African countries. No, I think that'll be fine as we go forward. But the first thing is we actually have to get out of the EU, and that's you know, as your other guests have said, that's proving a messy business.
Mike, you were nodding your head there when I was putting those points to Graham.
I'm always amused by the trade argument, bluntly, because currently we're sitting on the world's largest trade platform. The EU has got more global deals around the world than does the US, than does Australia, than does Canada, than does Switzerland. And basically, we've got this massive trading platform with over 50 FTAs and a whole set of bilateral deals. As we come out of the EU customs union, we drop out of all of those. We can only copy-paste a few that we can roll over. And so to think that we can then put on our own trade deals faster than the EU and do better, stronger deals than the EU is like jumping off a bus, taking a big tumble, and then thinking that you can run faster than the bus and overtake it. Those who are trade experts who look at this repeatedly say that it is bad for our trading relationship to come out of the club and try and go solo. We're in a much more powerful trading position at the helm of this club, which has global reach. And this is one of these cliches that just gets repeated and repeated. And I think it's the last thing that some of these Brexiteers are holding on to. They think sovereignty is all about these trade deals. But the very first trade deal we'd actually go for is one with Donald Trump. And we know what the terms of that are. It's giving up our agricultural and manufacturing standards, maybe chemical standards, and also allowing healthcare companies to come into our NHS and take over. If the US doesn't get that, they don't want that trade deal. So those are the kind of things that we're looking at, that within the EU we strongly buffer against, but outside of the EU we are desperado.
Julie, I've got plenty of questions for you, but I just want to go back to Graham here, because Graham, now you're shaking your head as you listen to Mike. and he mentioned agriculture. Just one of the things that people in the UK are worried about is having to accept chlorinated chicken from the United States. That's only one example, but why are you shaking your head so much?
Well, Mike sounds like one of those people who finds a dark cloud behind every silver lining. Of course, if we negotiate with the US, we'll negotiate on our terms. If we can't reach an agreement, we won't. We won't get one. But tariffs are very low towards the US anyway. It's really not that important. And of course, we'll still have access to the European Union. The average tariff into the European Union is only 4%. For most engineering products, it's something like 2%. It's really almost an irrelevance. So we'll still have access. And we'll, in all probability, we'll have a free trade agreement. That's in everybody's interests. And actually, it's particularly in the interest of the Republic of Ireland. So I think that there'll be give on the Irish backstop at some point. People will want to trade with us. We're the fifth biggest economy in the world. We've got a large market. It's in everybody's interest to do these trade deals. So I think that pessimism just isn't warranted in this case at all. There may be some difficulties. There will be negotiations, of course, but it'll be fine for the obvious reason that everybody will gain.
OK, we'll come back to the financial implications for the UK in just a moment, but let's look at the politics again. Julie, let's go back to March the 29th, 2017. Theresa May, on that date, triggered Article 50. That began the two-year process of exiting the European Union. Do you believe it was precipitous? Was she even ready to begin the negotiations when she triggered Article 50?
Well, clearly not. But then how could you be ready? You can't. It's a two-year process. That's quite a long time. How we've managed to get almost to the end of it and virtually get nowhere is utterly beyond me. It was clearly set up to fail because if there's a good deal to be had, if there's an amicable negotiation to be had, we'd have it by now. The fact is that what the UK wants, which is exactly the same advantages of being in the EU but being outside of it, the EU is not prepared to give because you've left the club, so you don't get those advantages. That's stalemate, and that's where we are. That was always going to be that. I mean, those of us who know anything about it said right from the beginning that's what's going to happen, and particularly the issue of Ireland. That is insoluble under the terms of this Article 52-year period. It's, there isn't a deal to be done, which is why there isn't one on the table, because the two sides do not have a landing zone that they can approach equally. So someone's going to be in pain at the end of this, and I just don't understand why the government have not been honest about that right from the beginning. They're beginning to be honest now, but it's a bit late, isn't it?
Julie, how do you have so much hair left? I thought you'd torn most of it out. Your position in the Conservative Party has really suffered, hasn't it?
I don't have a lot of hair, actually.
Well, you've been at odds with your own party and your position has suffered. What does it say about the ruling party of supposedly one of the greatest nations on earth, where democracy is the driving force and part of the beacon that is the United Kingdom to the rest of the world?
Well, one of the sad things about being a British politician abroad at the moment is that people just look at us in wonderment. And I'm constantly being told I never believed the United Kingdom could be this crazy, because we've always looked at it as a beacon of stability, etc. And I've always felt that way about my party. As a member of a political party, you never agree with everything 100%, but you usually can manage on the 80-20 rule. But I'm afraid Brexit broke my back, and there's no way I could agree with what my party were doing on Brexit, because I don't agree that we should be looking at something that we might sort of approximately be able to be in the same position as we are in the EU, outside the EU. I mean, we've gone from this huge sunlit uplands of everything's going to be marvellous to, well, we might just manage after a few years, maybe, to get somewhere back to where we were when we were part of the EU. That's just not good enough. It's appalling. And for a political party and a government to be saying, oh, we are about to inflict this self-harm on ourselves, is irresponsible. They should be out the door, and I believe they will be for a long time in the future. So the arguments coming through on trade, etc., are all now around, oh, well, maybe we can cobble something together that won't be that bad. I mean, the guy just said that, oh, well, looking forward to this great new deal with the US, but if it doesn't matter, it doesn't really matter. Oh, really? We're going through all this pain for a new deal? What if it doesn't work? It doesn't really matter. It'll be okay in a few years' time. Bloody hell. Sorry, I shouldn't swear on TV, but why? Why are we putting up with this? And why is the government putting up with this? And that's why I've fallen out with the party.
OK, Graham, you're a former advisor to Northern Ireland's First Minister. Just explain briefly, for the benefit of our viewers, and briefly, if you could, the issue with the Irish border. I'll just basically say that after Brexit, the Republic of Ireland in the south, ERA, is still going to be a member of the EU. Northern Ireland won't be a member of the EU. So what's the problem with the border?
Well, there shouldn't be much of a problem, but it will be a problem between the UK. It will be a border between the UK and the European Union. And therefore, if there are things like tariffs or differences in regulations, then normally one would have some border checks. Now, it's agreed on both sides of the border, both in Northern Ireland and in the Republic of Ireland, that this border is so complicated. There are something like 350 border crossings. There are probably more border crossings between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland than there are in the whole rest of the European Union. And it's a border that people cross daily, and farmers have land on both sides of the border, etc., etc. So the general agreement on both sides is that they don't want what's called a hard border, a border with any checks or controls. And there are various ways of doing that. And it's not of any great importance. Even for the Republic of Ireland, it's only 1% of their trade. For the UK, it's an infinitesimally small part of UK trade, small part of even Northern Ireland's trade goes across that border. So it's not a big issue. It can be solved. There's no question, by the way, of stopping individuals. It's agreed by both sides that individuals will be able to cross the border with no checks or stops. It's only a matter of recording trade. It can be done in lots of ways. But for various reasons, the Irish Republic and the EU want to make this as difficult as possible. And the European Union's proposals here amount to a sort of semi-annexation of Northern Ireland, which of course suits the Republic of Ireland's agenda to have a united Ireland. So deep politics get mixed up in this as well. But I'm sure that there will be a solution to it, and there will be a way out of it. But unfortunately, negotiations with the European Union always go to midnight on the very last day. That's how they seem to negotiate.
Okay.
For reasons I don't really understand.
Okay, but whatever issue we're talking about, including the Irish border issue, Julie, go on.
I'm just saying, he just gave an analysis there, but didn't mention the Good Friday Agreement, which is the essential issue here. That the reason this border is
no, it's not
sensitive beyond anything that is the rest of it is because of the Good Friday Agreement.
Yeah, certainly former Prime Minister John Major has said...
Ireland and the Irish Republic.
Yeah, John Major, former Prime Minister, has said exactly the same thing, because there's a concern that that part of the country may go back, of the two countries may go back to the time of the Troubles, when, of course, there was the issue of terrorism from both sides, from loyalists and also Republicans. That is a major issue as far as many people are concerned, possibly not Graham. Mike?
Yeah, could I chime in on something here, which is Ireland is a particular problem. In fact, it means that taking the UK out of the EU is harder than any other country. If you want to take out Luxembourg, or if you wanted to take out Croatia or Slovenia, it would be easier. The problem that we have with Ireland is that you've got the country of Ireland, and then you've got the United Kingdom, and they actually overlap on Northern Ireland. The citizens there are allowed to be Irish, or they're allowed to be British, or they're allowed to be both. That's the essence of the Good Friday Agreement. And then also Ireland has built its all-Ireland economy, a sort of single market there. And this complex border sort of weaves between it. Now, when we're all within the same standards, there are no problems. But as soon as you remove the UK from the EU so that the UK can diverge from Ireland, then that does cause problems at the border. Now, what you heard Mr. Gudgeon say before is that there are solutions to this. There are technological solutions, but the EU is being awkward. Well, no, not at all. The EU and Ireland are saying, right, if you've got technical solutions, brilliant. If you've got them now, put them on paper now. If you don't, then we'll just say, stay in the single market and customs union until you can prove that they work. So that's the only challenge there. If you fully believe that these technical solutions work, say, A-OK, let's move forward, that's brilliant, and in 1 year's time, we will have a stretch of border on which we prove this technology. Everyone will nod their heads, and then we'll go forward with the technology. And then the UK can move out of the single market and customs union.
Okay.
That's why it's called a backstop. It's a very straightforward process. And the fact that these Brexiteers are saying how easy it is to do, but we don't want to be held to this, shows that there's some disingenuous argumentation going on here.
Okay, now whatever issue we're discussing,
it's pure pragmatics.
Whether it's the border issue there, whether it's trade, whether it's immigration, whatever it is, a lot of people are criticising Theresa May and her government for just not being up to speed with all the issues. And we're going to play a clip, and
yes,
you will almost certainly have heard it because of your interests in this. But for the benefit of our viewers, this is the Brexit Secretary, Dominic Raab, talking about people being scared of supermarkets running out of food, of medicines not being available to people, and how the UK gets goods into the country. And here's what he had to say just a few days ago.
I hadn't quite understood the full extent of this, but if you look at the UK and you look at how we trade in goods, we're particularly reliant on the Dover-Calais crossing. And that's one of the reasons why, and there's been a lot of controversy about this, but one of the reasons why we've wanted to make sure that we have a specific and very proximate relationship with the EU to ensure frictionless trade at the border, particularly for just-in-time manufacturing goods, whether it's pharmaceutical goods or perishable goods like food. I don't think it's a question so much of the risk of major shortages, but I think probably the average consumer might not be aware of the full extent to which the choice of goods that we have in the stores are dependent on one or two very specific trade routes.
Okay, I think we can probably imagine what Julie and Mike are going to say to this clip. So, Graham, this Conservative government is negotiating Brexit with a Brexit secretary who seems to only have just understood that the UK, that Britain, is an island. Is this going to lead to the collapse of Theresa May's government and her losing the top position in the country if there's a no deal?
Well, I think that's a misrepresentation of what Dominic Raab was saying there, and what he believes. He's a very bright and capable man, and I think the negotiations have improved a great deal since he's been involved. Of course, we've known right from the beginning that Dover-Calais is a pinch point. A lot of our trade comes through. Most of our what's called ro-ro trade, roll-off ferry trade comes through there. But it's very hard to imagine why that's such a big problem. Again, modern border technology used on most borders now with vehicle recognition cameras and all the rest of it should allow all the traffic through very, very quickly. Not obvious to me who exactly is going to stop the traffic. I mean, are the French going to be stopping their own exports? I'm sure nobody on the UK side is going to be stopping anybody. So this sounds like, I mean, the whole issue of Dover-Calais and food shortages and so on sounds like fairly standard project fare. We had that during the referendum. Most of it, especially the projections coming from the Treasury, have been shown to be complete rubbish, and I think we'll find that again here.
Listen, I really honestly thought, and Mike can explain this better as a scientist, that it's also a question in terms of food. For example, meat coming in from the EU, which the UK won't be a part of, having to be checked by a vet. And that would take a few days to do that check. Mike, just expand on that point, because I believe we're talking about kilometres and kilometres of lorries being backed up, having to be checked. Because if the UK opens its borders and says, look, because the goods are coming in from the EU, that would allow criminal elements around the rest of the continent to take advantage of that kind of open border. So if there are going to be checks when the UK leaves the EU, what problem is that going to create for trade along the south of the UK, connected with France and the Channel Tunnel and so on?
Okay, it worries me that you had Mr. Gudgeon there saying that this is Project Fear. This is from the government itself and Brexiteers in government talking about the problems with this. These are their own plans when they are announcing that they are going to be stockpiling medicines. So it's absurd to me that kind of like, is the world against us? Is the world doing Project Fear? Even the Brexiteers on our side? This is pretty nutty thinking. We know that if you come outside a customs union and come outside a market and have different standards, you do, under World Trade Organization rules, have to provide fair checks on that. Fair checks from the countries all over the world to the same kind of standards. Also, if the EU said that they're going to do fair checks on their borders, and that blocks up our exports going into the EU, then a lot of things that shuttle back and forth also then get blocked up, and that also provides us with tailbacks. Essentially, the fundamental problem here is that we have built our relationship with the EU, both in trade, but also science, also cross-border healthcare, also security, on a set of contracts. We do international business via contracts, and the notion that you can just rip all of those away suddenly and that you will still get deals and commerce and trade going without a contractual basis and ways to implement that is why we're looking at this whole set of chaos associated with the no deal. Again, you can say Project Fear if you like, but this is our own government with Brexiteers in cabinet, these Brexiteers announcing what they are preparing for a no-deal circumstance.
Okay, listen, we know, Julie and Mike, you support a second Brexit referendum, and we've actually run out of time. So, Julie, I'll allow you a one-word answer if you don't mind. Will Theresa May be Prime Minister this time next year? One word.
No.
Julie, Graham, Mike, thank you very much indeed for your time.
No.
Still to come, multiple attacks rock Afghanistan as the Taliban gains ground. Is the government losing control? And could this summit in Qatar's capital make us healthier and live longer? They were begging to be kept safe. Instead, they were blown up. A suicide bomber attacked Monday's demonstration of hundreds of protesters in Kabul who were demanding better security. 6 people were killed, 20 wounded. Daesh claimed responsibility, but it's a resurgent Taliban that's a concern for many in Afghanistan. They've launched a series of attacks in the past few days, killing commandos, police officers, and civilians. The militants are said to be back in control of almost half the country, and the government is accused of not doing enough. Almost exactly 17 years since the US-led invasion of Afghanistan, is the government in Kabul losing control? Sandra Gatman reports.
Suicide bombs, shootings, and assassinations. Taliban attacks against US and Afghan security forces are on the rise. Civilian deaths are at a record high of around 300 this year. This week, 6 people were killed at a police checkpoint.
Typified really the citizen soldier.
Earlier this month, the mayor of an American city serving in Afghanistan was shot dead by an Afghan soldier. Before that, dozens of attacks on US and Afghan forces killed many more in the capital Kabul and across the country.
I call on the Taliban and other insurgent groups to stop killing their fellow Afghans.
Hopes were high that last month's parliamentary elections would deliver some stability to the war-torn country. But the vote was marred by allegations of fraud and nearly 200 separate attacks by the Taliban. One of the group's most high-profile killings was of General Abdul Razik, a powerful Kandahar police chief and long-serving US ally who had survived many attempts on his life. Only months ago, a brief ceasefire between the Taliban and Afghan government renewed optimism that the two sides could negotiate a peace deal. But the Taliban's recent offensive has dampened any hope of making more progress, and both sides have refused to meet each other. Russia has tried to broker negotiations, and the Taliban did attend a meeting in Moscow with diplomats from China, Iran, and other regional players.
Helping the Afghans to stop these plans and eradicate the terrorist threat is the task of all our countries and of the multilateral organizations in the region.
But no high-level Afghan nor US officials took part. Meanwhile, Afghan forces appear to be losing the ground war. One figure says they currently control just over 55% of the country's districts. That's down from 75% from 2015. Personnel are also in short supply. There's a deficit of 40,000 people, or 11% of Afghanistan's 352,000 personnel target. The worsening security picture poses questions about whether Washington will step up support. Ashraf Ghani's government depends on billions of dollars in U.S. funding to train and equip the police and the military. While U.S. President Donald Trump is openly skeptical of America's role in Afghanistan and already increased U.S. soldiers to 15,000 last year.
America will work with the Afghan government as long as we see determination and progress. However, our commitment is not unlimited.
Diplomats are looking ahead to next year's presidential elections with anxiety. An ideal scenario could see Afghanistan's warring parties agree on a power-sharing deal, though they'd have to be willing to negotiate first. Delaying the vote is another option, but many fear that would likely bring more uncertainty and more fighting. Sandra Gatman, The Newsmakers.
Let's bring in our panel now. In Kabul, the capital of Afghanistan, of course, is Javed Faisal. He's the former deputy spokesman for the chief executive of Afghanistan. Javed was a candidate for Kandahar in the recent parliamentary elections. And David Sedney is in the United States, in Abingdon, Maryland. He's a former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Central Asia. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us on the Newsmakers. Javed, you were at the scene of the attack that killed your good friend General Abdul Razik recently. You have seen how the government is on the back foot in a very tragic and personal way. What is happening in the fight against the Taliban at the moment?
Yes, the recent incidents throughout Afghanistan were not pleasant incidents. But the one thing that is even hurtful is that the terrorist groups, mostly Taliban and Haqqani, they have been attacking the Afghan civilians. They have been attacking our populated areas, our cities. The army and the police, there is a fight going on, but the civilians who have nothing to do with the fight, that's something that is very concerning. And when we talk that there is hope for peace with Taliban, then there has to be positive intent shown by Taliban. They cannot kill us and they cannot talk to us about peace. Both things cannot be carried out in the same time. They should either choose to do peace with us or to continue to kill us like they have been doing for years. What we are hoping for is that there has to be a peaceful solution to the problem in Afghanistan, because Taliban have fought for 16 years and we have fought them for 16 years, and we did not come to a conclusion. So given that, there has to be a conclusion through dialogue, through talks, and that is for the best interest of Afghanistan, the Afghan government, the Afghan people, and the Taliban who are from Afghanistan.
And until there are peace talks, while the fighting goes on, how can the government hope to succeed when there are reports of the military not being paid for 3 months? There are military personnel complaining that they haven't been paid, winter is coming, they have to feed their families. What kind of motivation could anyone who works in security in Afghanistan have to do their job when they can't even take care of their own basic needs? So here we're talking about the government's responsibility towards keeping its people safe.
When we talk about the Afghan forces, it's a voluntary force. Their best reason to fight against terrorism and Taliban is the Afghan people. It's their country. They are fighting for their country. They are on the right side. They are working for a good cause, and they are fighting the devil. That's the best encouragement for them. But again, we can also talk about the responsibilities of the government. The Afghan government has to be a responsible government. They have been trying their best. We have witnessed some reforms in the security institutions, but there is more that should be done. If we look at what people want right now, we are hearing about Malistan, we are hearing of Jaghuri, the Ghazni, and people came out to the government. they asked the government for rescue, they asked the government for protection, which means the people are with the government, which means the people are against Taliban and terrorist outfits. And if we talk about the Afghan elections, the turnout and the participation from the people was very good, despite the threats coming from Taliban constantly that they will be attacking polling centers. And the Afghan security forces provided the security for the polling stations on the polls day, and people participated. And people decided to choose democracy over fear and terror. They defied Taliban, they stood for their rights, and they will continue to stand for their rights. But again, the Afghan government needs to do something more than this, and our international partners, the Americans, the NATO members, they have to make sure that Pakistan is encouraged or pressurized to do something against Taliban, because we all know that Pakistan is behind Taliban, that there are sanctuaries, safe havens, training facilities, and medical facilities for insurgents within Pakistan. Quetta Shura, Peshawar Shura, those are there. So our international partners must encourage Pakistan to take actions against insurgent groups, or to encourage insurgent groups to come to the peace talks, because the goal we are achieving in Afghanistan, which is eradication of terrorism, it's a common goal, it's a shared goal. The international community should be burdening.
Let's put that
should be shouldering the burden.
Sure, Javed, let's put that to David, because David, you know how the American government works. You've recently returned from Afghanistan. Shall we start with your own personal observations of what you encountered there?
The situation in Afghanistan has always been complex, and I would say the current push for peace is making it even more complex. I think it's fairly clear that the Taliban upsurged in aggressive attacks, including, as your colleague from Kabul pointed out, on civilian targets, seems to be connected with the possibility of peace discussions. The Taliban, as many insurgent groups have done in other conflicts, if they see peace coming, they want to have peace from a position of strength. So they're seeking to expand their reach, to carry out attacks that put the government on the back foot. The government has to defend the entire country. The Taliban can attack wherever they want. So I think that's part of what you see. But at the same time, there is real disagreement and infighting at the top levels of Afghan politics. There's presidential elections scheduled for next year, although there are some rumors those presidential elections might be put off. There are top leaders in Afghanistan debating over who will run on which ticket. There's a lot of confusion at the top levels and not a lot of unity. So at the same time the Taliban are stepping up their attacks, Afghanistan politically is not as unified as it should be.
Javed is saying there that the Afghan government needs more external assistance, and he's mentioning specifically to put pressure on Pakistan. That's long been the accusation that there are elements in the Pakistani military that are supporting the Taliban. But what about the possibility of American troops being back on the front line? Could that ever happen? Because we now know that the American troops that are there are supposed to be, well, they're supposed to be training and doing other exercises with the Afghan security forces, who are the ones who are doing all the fighting now. Will the Americans be interested in making any change? Would it be in their interest? Is it even incumbent upon Donald Trump to change the strategy in Afghanistan again?
No, I don't see any chance that there will be increased U.S. troop presence or increased role of U.S. troops in fighting. The role the U.S. is playing right now of advising and assisting is what they've been doing, what the U.S. has been doing since 2014. It wasn't doing enough of it. So last year, President Trump announced an expansion of those advisors. But you're not going to see U.S. troops fighting the way they were from up until 2014. What you might see is greater pressure on Pakistan, because, as you mentioned before, the issue of Pakistan continues to be the big unsolved conundrum of this war. As long as the Taliban have the safe haven in Pakistan, and again, history shows us insurgent movements with a safe haven in a neighboring country do not lose. They may not win, but they do not lose. They continue fighting. So putting pressure on Pakistan would be important. The U.S. government has put some pressure on Pakistan, but right now there's a lot of doubt about the U.S. As President Trump has shown in other circumstances, he can change his mind. People are afraid that he may be willing to pull out of Afghanistan rather than put more troops in.
What do you think the chances are? David, what do you think the chances are of that? Because at this recent conference that Russia hosted, the Taliban said that they'd be prepared to speak to the Afghan government if the Americans pull out. And until recently, the Taliban had always been saying, we're not even going to talk to our own government, we want to talk to the US. Now they're saying they'll talk to the Afghan government if American troops pull out. Is that a possibility?
Well, it's already happened. The Taliban have had a number of meetings with the US, including Ambassador Khalilzad, the U.S. Special Envoy, met with him his last trip. He's meeting with them again. So the U.S. and the Taliban have met. The U.S. pulled out of Afghanistan, pulled all its combat troops out in 2014, and the Taliban only increased their attacks. So this statement that if U.S. troops, the few that are remaining, were to pull out, the Taliban would talk to the government is really a smokescreen. The Taliban use this allegation that they're waiting for foreign troops to leave as an excuse not to talk. We'll see if the Taliban are serious about peace if they sit down with the Afghan government. That's been the case for the last 15 years and still remains that the Taliban have not decided on peace. There are divisions inside the Taliban. Some members of the Taliban want peace, others want to continue fighting. And that division at the top of the Taliban is really the major reason you haven't seen peace in Afghanistan, not anything dealing with U.S. troops.
Javed, you mentioned a couple of different areas of Afghanistan. So just in the past few days alone, 30 commandos killed, 15 others killed in Jaghori. Malistan, Khaz, Uruzgan and Jaghori, they've been under siege by the Taliban for a few days. At least 150 police missing in the village of Khost. 37 police killed in a Taliban attack in Farah province. This is a group to whom Ashraf Ghani, the president, offered to negotiate and to try to strike a peace deal which would eventually see, he said, the president, the Taliban even becoming a political party. If the Taliban isn't going to accept those kinds of terms, do you really have any hope that they'll accept anything?
Well, first thing we have to clarify that Taliban's fight in Afghanistan is not because that we have the Americans or international troops in Afghanistan. Their mission, their military mission was ended in 2014, and the Afghans have been defending Afghanistan on their own. Plus, if you look into Taliban, their fight in Afghanistan does not continue after 2001. They were fighting against Afghans from 1993, 94, 95 until 2001. And they are still fighting against the Afghan people. In 1995, we had no Americans in Afghanistan. There were no foreigners in Afghanistan, based on which Taliban had to fight. Their fight in Afghanistan is not for the purpose of country's protection or avoiding invasion or anything. It's purely the protection of Pakistan's interests in Afghanistan. Their foreign policy objectives are linked to the support of terrorist groups in Afghanistan. What we are hoping as Afghans and what we expect Taliban to act upon as Afghans is that they should not serve the interests of others. They have to come to Afghanistan, make peace with their Afghan brothers and sisters, and not to destroy their own institutions, not to kill their own people. Look at their number of attacks, let's say in the last 1 year. How many foreigners have they attacked, or where they have attacked? They have been attacking, like I said earlier, our cities, our children, our women, our elderly people. Why should our school be blown up? Why should our roads be blown up? Why should our clinics should be torched? So those are all the issues that the Afghan people are having with the Taliban, and we expect them to come to the peace talks. But if we look into the past, there is not much hope. And if you look to the casualty numbers, it's not just the Afghan forces that we mentioned up. If you go into the numbers released by the Afghan Defense Ministry and Interior Ministry, you will see hundreds of Taliban are being killed on a daily basis throughout the country. It's not just the Afghan fatalities, it's also the insurgents and the enemies that we have been killing on a daily basis. But again, the solution is not to continue to fight. The solution is to talk and to sit like humans and talk to each other and stop this nonsense and bloodshed in Afghanistan.
Javed, David, thank you very much for joining us on the Newsmakers.
we made a malaria vaccine with an entirely new approach. We gave the patients living malaria parasites at the same time as an anti-malaria medicine, and thereby made a vaccine that was so successful that we saw 100% protection after infecting the patients with the same parasite.
100 years ago, catching an infectious disease was essentially a death sentence. But after years of innovation, many are now easily treatable. But that also depends on where you live in the world. Millions of people in low-income countries die from preventable diseases every year. Nearly half the world's population is still at risk from malaria, and Ebola is back in Africa. The DRC is facing its worst outbreak of the disease. At a summit in Qatar, 2,000 healthcare experts have come together to try to create a healthier world. The executive chair of the World Innovation Summit for Health joins us now from Doha. He is Lord Darzi of Denham, also a former health minister in the United Kingdom. Lord Darzi, welcome to the Newsmakers. You know, malaria and also Ebola, two very good examples of diseases which really show the difference between healthcare in the north and the south of the globe. Hardly anybody in the north dies from these two diseases. What needs to be done to bridge that gap between healthcare in the north and healthcare in the south, do you think?
I agree there are big gaps between the north and the south, but I think it's also important to realize that some of the prevalence of some of the diseases in the south are high because the context is very different. Malaria being a good example, that's a transmission through a mosquito as a vector, where there isn't much mosquitoes in the north for temperature and climate issues. One of the areas we're discussing at WISH this time is climate change, and I think that is one of the big threats, because you can very easily, with the warming environment in the north, have similar problems when it comes to malaria and the vector being the mosquitoes. So when it comes to the burden of disease in the south, malaria is a huge burden, but we've seen some wonderful innovations in that field, as your film suggested, in terms of vaccines. The Gates Foundation have been extremely active in the eradication of malaria, if that's at all possible. But, you know, history in the last century is littered with examples of infectious disease that we've gone on top of. Polio is a good example. We need to do more in completely eradicating polio from the face of the earth, as we did with smallpox. So there are examples of success. We need to learn from them, and the World Innovation Summit for Health is all about sharing these success stories and innovations that will look at improving the life expectancy, but also the quality of life in years to come, whether that happens to be in the north or the south.
Yeah, tell us about some of those innovations that you're going to be hearing about over those 2 days of that summit in Doha, those innovations that are going to improve the quality of our lives and extend our lives even.
Absolutely. So we looked at one of the forums that I just left earlier is in areas of artificial intelligence, machine learning, data sciences. We feel that is one of the most, and digital obviously, and we feel that is probably one of the most powerful transformational tools in health and healthcare delivery in terms of empowerment of the patients. You know, most of us now carry one of these, so-called a smartphone, which has a computing power that beats any big computer we had 10 years ago, and the ability to measure your own physiological parameters in terms of your blood pressure, your pulse, your physical activity, the number of steps you've done. All of these will empower you as an individual to focus on your physical health. And as you know, prevention is better than cure. In terms of hospital and healthcare delivery, the opportunity of automation, the opportunity of machine learning, as we've looked at one example in mammography, which is breast screening x-rays, in which the machine could detect early signs of breast cancer through a mammography much quicker, much more accurately, is the type of technological revolutions we're going to be seeing in the future. And that is going to have a huge impact in detecting earlier disease, understanding the risk at a population level, intervening at an earlier stage, And as you know, in any disease, if you intervene earlier, the outcomes are going to be much, much better.
Johns Hopkins University, just picking up on this point you've made about machine learning, data analytics, AI, Johns Hopkins University has found in the United States the third biggest killer of patients is medical error. So would you definitely expect machines to improve on that percentage?
Absolutely. I mean, well, one thing about medical error, error is human. Now, if you take the human aspect out of that in terms of automation and alert systems, and we've seen that example certainly where I work of an algorithm that now detects or at least alerts me that a patient is going off in renal failure, tested in one of our big teaching hospitals in London, and it has prevented the progression into kidney failure in a hospital setting by about 80%. These are the types of innovations that we will be seeing in the future, rather than a doctor getting an alert in the morning to say, by the way, you have a patient who's unwell. In actual fact, the machine will be sending the alert that this patient is deteriorating into kidney failure. So what they're saying to you is absolutely right in Hopkins, and we're going to see the translation of that in improving patient safety. Patient safety is very close to my own research and my own heart, really, in many ways, because we know the prevalence of safety or errors is about 1 in 10 in every patient coming into hospital. And technology will help us in reducing that to negligible. No patient wants to come in to get something done to them and leave with an error which led them to have another complication.
Lord Darzi, we very much appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us on The Newsmakers.
Hey, wait, where are you going? Hey, you were supposed to be my lift home. How will I get out of here? I love you all, and my parting word, of course, is Excelsior!
That's all for this edition of The Newsmakers with me, Adnan Nawaz. Check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Remember to like, follow and subscribe. Next time, the United States likes to think of itself as the freest country on earth, so why can't 500,000 people vote in the nation's capital? Until then, thanks for watching. Goodbye.